So I've got something super exciting for you today, and I really think this is going to help a lot of people out there. We keep getting messages about Linux interviews, right? Like how to prepare for them and stuff.
Oh man, absolutely. You know what? I've been looking forward to this episode for weeks now. There's just so much to cover when it comes to Linux interviews. And I've been through, well, I can't even count how many of these both as a candidate and as an interviewer.
That's exactly why I wanted to do this episode of how to prepare for a Linux job interview with you. Because, you've been on both sides of the table, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know what's really interesting? Each interview is different, but there are these patterns, these core things that keep coming up again and again. I'm super excited to share all of this knowledge with our listeners today.
I've got so many questions for you about this whole process. Where do people usually start? What should they focus on?
Oh, we're going to dive deep into all of that. And I've got some really, really practical tips that people can actually use right away. The kind of stuff I wish someone had told me when I was starting out, right?
So let's dive into the basics here. What are some of the fundamental Linux concepts that keep coming up in these interviews?
Oh man, right. So first thing that always comes up is the Linux file system hierarchy. Understanding the different directories like io, etc., va, bin, and what they're actually used for. This is super fundamental stuff that every interviewer expects you to know.
Could you break that down a bit more? What specifically should people know about these directories?
Yeah, absolutely. So, ash etc. is where all your system-wide configuration files live, right? And var is for variable data, things that change during system operation like logs and stuff. And then you've got -bin, which is, it's where all your essential command binaries are stored, the stuff you need to actually use the system.
What about commands? There must be certain ones that come up all the time.
Oh my goodness, yes! There are these absolute must-know commands that you just can't avoid. You know what I mean? Things like ls, cd, grep, awk, sed. These are like the bread and butter of Linux administration. And the thing is, they don't just want you to know the commands. They want you to understand the options, the flags, how to combine them together.
And what about process management? That sounds pretty important too.
Absolutely critical. Understanding processes is it's fundamental to Linux administration. You need to know how to check running processes with ps and top, how to manage them, how to kill them when they're misbehaving. And then there's stuff like understanding process states, priorities,
So these concepts all tie together somehow?
Oh, totally. Everything in Linux is connected, right? When you're managing processes, you're often looking at log files in var, using commands from bin, checking configuration files in, etc. It's all this beautiful interconnected system, and that's what makes it so powerful, Interviewers really want to see that you understand these connections.
So when it comes to actually showing your Linux skills in an interview, what kind of practical scenarios do they typically throw at you?
Oh man, so the thing is, they love giving you these real-world problems to solve, right? They'll often present you with a scenario where, a server is running out of disk space and they want to see how you tackle that. They're really looking at your troubleshooting process. You know what I mean?
And what's a good way to approach these kinds of scenarios?
Right. So the key thing is to show your thought process, right? First, you'd probably run df-h to check disk usage, then maybe du to find the largest files. And you want to explain each step as you go. It's not just about knowing the commands. It's about showing how you think through problems.
What other types of technical challenges should people be ready for?
Oh, they love throwing networking stuff at you. They might ask you to diagnose connectivity issues, right? So you'd need to know your networking commands. Stuff like netstat, ping, traceroute. And sometimes they'll ask about configuring firewalls with IP tables or setting up SSH keys for secure access.
How do you show that deeper level of understanding they're looking for?
The thing is, it's all about connecting the dots, right? If they ask about SSH, don't just talk about the commands. Talk about the security implications. Talk about key management. Talk about, how you'd actually implement it in a real environment. They want to see that practical experience coming through.
Do these technical assessments ever involve actual coding or scripting?
Oh, totally. shell scripting is it's absolutely crucial. They might ask you to write a quick script to monitor system resources or maybe automate some routine tasks. And they really want to see your ability to use things like loops, conditional statements, the whole scripting toolkit.
What about handling high-pressure situations in these assessments?
Yeah, so this is super important. They often throw in these scenarios where multiple things are going wrong at once, right? Like maybe the system is running slow and there's high CPU usage and users are complaining. They want to see how you prioritize, how you stay calm under pressure. You know what I mean? It's about showing that you can handle real-world situations.
Speaking of real-world situations, what are some typical sysadmin tasks they might ask about in interviews?
Oh man, so they really love diving into the day-to-day stuff, right? Like they'll often ask about user management and system updates and backing up data. These are just, absolutely fundamental things that every sysadmin needs to handle.
What kind of troubleshooting scenarios do they typically present?
So the thing is, they love throwing these complex problems at you, right? Like they might say something like, the system's running slow and users can't access the database. And they want to see your whole approach, like how you'd check the logs, monitor system resources, and really get to the root of the problem.
What about security? That seems pretty important these days.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Security is it's huge right now. They'll definitely ask about things like hardening systems, implementing proper authentication, and managing user permissions. And they really want to see that you understand stuff like SE Linux, firewall configurations. You know what I mean?
What are some specific security scenarios they might bring up?
Right. So they might present you with this scenario where there's been a potential security breach, right? And they will want to see how you'd respond. Like, they're looking for your knowledge of things like checking system logs, monitoring network traffic, and implementing immediate security measures. It's all about showing that you can handle these critical situations.
And what about regular maintenance tasks?
Oh, this is super important. They want to know that you can handle the routine stuff that keeps everything running smoothly, right? Like scheduling regular backups, monitoring system health, and managing storage efficiently. And they really want to see that you understand automation because that's just crucial for managing systems at scale,
How important is documentation in all of this?
The thing is, documentation is just absolutely critical. Like, they want to know that you're documenting your changes, your procedures, and especially your troubleshooting steps. Because in a real environment, other people need to understand what you've done, right? It's not just about fixing problems, it's about creating this knowledge base that the whole team can use. You know what I mean?
So after covering all these technical aspects, what's the best way to actually, prepare for these interviews?
Oh, this is something I'm really passionate about. The absolute best way to prepare is to get your hands dirty, right? Like set up a home lab and just start experimenting. You can use virtual machines or even just a Raspberry Pi,
What kind of setup would you recommend for practicing?
So, the thing is, you want to create scenarios that are as close to real-world situations as possible, right? Like, set up multiple machines, configure networking between them, and practice everything we've talked about. VMware or VirtualBox are just perfect for this. And you can even use something like Vagrant to quickly spin up different environments.
Are there any specific resources you'd recommend?
Oh man, absolutely. There's this amazing site called Linux Journey that's it's perfect for beginners. And then you've got the Linux Documentation Project, right? It's like this massive resource of knowledge. Oh, and definitely check out Linux Academy or even just diving into the man pages, you know what I mean?
What about practice interviews?
Right. So this is super important. You want to find someone, like maybe a friend in the industry or even join these online communities where people do mock interviews. And what's really cool is that sites like Git have tons of interview questions that you can practice with, right? It's all about getting comfortable with explaining your thought process.
How should people structure their practice time?
So the thing is, you want to make it really systematic, right? Like set aside regular time each day and focus on different topics. Maybe spend one day on file systems, another on networking, and really drill down into each area. The key is consistency, And don't just read about it, actually do it. Because that's how you really learn, right? That hands-on experience is it's absolutely invaluable.
So after everything we've covered today, what would you say are like the most crucial takeaways for our listeners?
Oh man, let me break this down because this is super important, right? First and foremost, you've got to understand those core Linux concepts like the file system hierarchy and basic commands. And then there's process management, you know what I mean?
And what about the practical side of things?
That's exactly it. The practical experience is it's absolutely critical. Like, you can read all the books in the world, right? But nothing beats actually working with Linux systems. Set up that home lab we talked about. And just experiment constantly. Break things, fix things. That's how you learn.
Is there anything else you'd really want to emphasize?
Yeah, definitely. Don't just focus on memorizing commands, right? Really understand the concepts behind everything. And another super important thing is being able to troubleshoot effectively, because that's what employers are really looking for, They want someone who can solve real problems.
Any final words of encouragement?
Oh, absolutely. Look, Linux interviews might seem intimidating at first, but if you follow what we've discussed today, if you practice consistently and really immerse yourself in the technology, you're going to do great. Remember, everyone started somewhere, right? And the Linux community is just incredibly supportive. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. Keep learning, keep practicing, and you've totally got this.
Thanks so much, Mark. This has been incredibly helpful. And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on how to prepare for a Linux job interview. Until next time.
Thanks, everyone. And remember, practice makes perfect, right? See you next time.